in mid-November of 2025, I did an episode on extrajudicial killings, focusing on the targeting of speedboats, mostly from Venezuela headed toward the United States, by the US military. These boats were allegedly carrying drugs meant for the US market, and the US government justified these strikes by saying, basically, we have the right to protect ourselves, protect our citizens from the harm caused by these illegal substances. And if we have to keep taking out these boats and killing these people to do that, we will. There's been a lot of back and forthing about the legitimacy of this approach, both in the sense that not all of these boats have been shown to be carrying drugs. Some just seem to be fishing boats in the wrong place at the wrong time, and in the sense that launching strikes without the go-ahead of Congress in the United States is a legally dubious business. There was also the matter of some alleged follow-up strikes, which seemed to be intended to kill people who survived the initial sinking of the boats, which is a big international human rights no-no to the point of potentially being a war crime. All of this happened within the context of a war of words between US President Trump's second administration and the increasingly authoritarian regime of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who followed the previous president Hugo Chavez as his hand-picked successor, and has more or less completed the authoritarian process of dissolving, co-opting, or diminishing all aspects of the Venezuelan government that might ever check his power, which allowed him in 2024 to bar the very popular, now Nobel Prize-winning candidate, Maria Corina Machado, from running, and her sub-in candidate, like previous Maduro opponent Juan Guaido, seems to have won the election by a fair bit and in an internationally provable way. But Maduro's government faked results that made it look like Maduro won, and his single-party rule has since continued unabated. Or rather, it continued unabated until the early morning of January 3rd, 2026, at around 2 a.m., when U.S. Operation Absolute Resolve kicked into action, leading to the, depending on who you ask, justified capture or illegal kidnapping of Maduro and his wife from a stronghold in his country. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. The operation itself, but also the consequences and potential meaning of it within the context of other important things happening in the world right now. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. Maduro is very popular with about a fifth of the Venezuelan population, but essentially everyone else is strongly opposed to him and his iron-fisted rule. It's estimated that between 2017 and 2025, just shy of 8 million people, which is more than 20% of Venezuela's 2017 population, has fled the country in order to escape a tyrannical government and its failed policies, which have collapsed the economy, made getting work and feeding oneself and one's family very difficult, and made crime, conflict, and the state-sanctioned oppression of anyone who does not kowtow to the ruling party a commonplace thing. Trump speculated about the possibility of invading Venezuela even in his first administration, and part of the overt rationale was that it is run by a failed government and that most of the locals hate that government, so it would be an easy win. That justification shifted to orient around immigration and drugs by his second administration. And then more recently, Trump has said publicly that the real issue here is that Venezuela stole a bunch of US company-owned oil assets when it nationalized the industry back in the day, and those assets should be recaptured, given back to the US, which is the rightful owner of that oil infrastructure and those untapped oil resources. Operation Absolute Resolve took months to plan and only about 2.5 hours to complete. By most objective measures, it was a spectacular military and intelligence success, especially considering all the moving parts and thus all the things that could have gone wrong. The operation apparently involved at least 150 aircraft of various sorts, a spy within Maduro's government, and months of surveillance, which helped them establish Maduro's habits and routines, and that allowed them to map out where he would be when and what to expect going in to get him. All of these patterns changed in September of 2025 when US warships started massing in the Caribbean as Maduro started to get a little paranoid. justifiably as it turns out, and he started moving between 8 different locations, seldom sleeping in the same place more than one night in a row. He was eventually grabbed from a military base in Caracas, Venezuela's capital, and to make that happen, the US military assets in the area had to take out local aviation and air defenses so that US Delta Force troops could be carried in by helicopter. Several air bases and communications centers were taken out by missiles, and fighter jets were bombed on airbase tarmacs. Trump alluded that a cyber attack of some kind might have also been used to take out power in the area, though satellite imagery suggests bombs might have been used against a power station to make that happen. The operation apparently went almost exactly as planned, though a helicopter was damaged, and the Delta Force team killed a large part of Maduro's security team when Maduro refused to surrender. A few U.S. soldiers were wounded, but none were killed, and Venezuelan officials said in the aftermath that at least 40 Venezuelans were killed throughout the country during the operation. Maduro and his wife were swept from the base before they could lock themselves in their safe room, and they were tucked into the helicopters which headed back out to sea, landing the 2 prisoners on the USS Iwo Jima, which is an assault ship. All of this took a matter of hours and again is generally considered to be an objective success in terms of precision, outcome, and other such metrics. Morally, legally, and politically, however, the operation is receiving far more mixed responses, and that response is continuing to play out as Maduro works his way through a bizarre version of the U.S. justice system, where he is being tried in court for drug dealing, among other crimes. In the U.S., Trump supporters have generally said all of this was a good, smart move, though some maintain that U.S. involvement in any kind of international conflict is a waste of time and effort and resources, and they worry that we're going to get bogged down in Venezuela in the same way the U.S. military has been bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places over the years. Everyone else is generally against the effort, even those who admit that Maduro was a tyrant who needed to go. It's good that he's gone, but the way in which it was done is not just questionable, but actually worrying because of what it says about Trump's capacity to unilaterally launch kidnapping missions against the leaders of other countries, basically. Not a good look, but also kind of scary. Internationally, the response is generally aligned with the latter opinion, especially in other countries that Trump has at some point threatened, which is most of them. Governments in South and Central America have been especially concerned, however, because one of Trump's newer messaging efforts has revolved around the concept of a Western Hemisphere that is basically protected and owned in some ways by the United States. All you big countries can do whatever you want in the rest of the world, but everything over here in the Western Hemisphere belongs to the US. This has raised the possibility that an emboldened Trump might attempt similar maneuvers soon, including possibly claiming the Panama Canal for the US again, or grabbing the leaders of other Latin American countries that he does not think are kowtowing enthusiastically enough, towing the new international line that he is drawing, basically. He has also renewed messages around the possible purchase or capture of Greenland, which has been raising alarm bells across Europe in particular. Greenland is considered to be a vital strategic base for U.S. security, and it would grant potential access to an abundance of also strategically but also economically important minerals, both on land and underwater. But Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, and most European leaders have said something along the lines of, if the US takes action to militarily claim Greenland, that will be the end of NATO, an organization that was originally founded to help protect the world, and Europe especially, from military conquest by the Soviet Union, but which at that point might need to be recalibrated to protect against incursions from the United States as well. NATO has been mostly funded and perpetuated by the United States, until recently, however, so there's a chance that something else would need to replace it if the US no longer provided nuclear deterrence as the ultimate whammy against a potential Russian invasion of its European neighbors. The UN has also indicated that they consider this operation to be a violation of international law and have called it a dangerous precedent, because one nation capturing the leader of another nation unilaterally kind of negates the purpose of negotiation and the whole concept of international law. That kind of use of force is meant to be granted by the UN in bizarre, extreme circumstances, not attempted secretively and outside the bounds of international processes for those sorts of things. All that said, the Trump administration seems to be mostly leaning into the victory, gleefully taking a victory lap and talking about next step potential targets, the most likely of which seems to be in Iran, a longtime U.S. opponent and a target of this administration last year when the U.S. attacked Iranian nuclear facilities alongside Israel. There are ongoing and seemingly significant protests happening across Iran right now, so the U.S. could see this as another opportunity to topple another unpopular authoritarian regime while also getting the chance to flex its military and intelligence capabilities at a moment in which other big-name players in that space, like Russia, are generally flailing. Russia's failed to protect several of its allies, including Venezuela, over the past few years, and its intended few-day invasion of Ukraine has now stretched into years. So every time the US does something like this successfully, it, in comparison, makes other big countries, like Russia, look pretty bad when they can't do the same. That contrast is considered to be meaningful by most analysts, and though a lot of the PR about the capture of Maduro has focused on the oil, most US-based oil executives have said it's a red herring. The hundreds of billions of dollars that would be required to extract more of Venezuela's abundant but sour crude oil, which is expensive to process and difficult to get back on the market as a consequence, wouldn't be worth it. And it's thus potentially more likely that this operation and other potential future similar operations are partly meant as a means of keeping the press and US public focused on something other than the Epstein files and other major issues that Trump and his administration are having at home, while also allowing Trump to test the boundaries of his power, what the public and government will let him get away with currently, and what he can do to expand that range of what he can get away with without any outside buy-in or significant personal consequences in the future. The book I'd like to recommend today is called The Keep by F. Paul Wilson. Now, the premise of this book is pretty easy to express. It is vampire versus Nazis. It's a slightly older book, and the pace is therefore a little bit different from what you might expect if you read mostly contemporary fiction. But that said, it is a fun read. There's a couple of twists and turns that you probably won't see coming. And as a premise, vampire versus Nazis is kind of fun. He's not the sexy kind of vampire, so who do you want to win? Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of The Keep by F. Paul Wilson. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.